Experience here at NRG Stadium and Park in Houston, Texas. We are so thankful that you have joined us as our powerful panel sessions continue for the day. This is NTZ Impact Week 2022. And on behalf of our board for NTZ Inc. and all of our team, we thank you for joining us. Please, please, please tell all your friends, tag them, invite them to come in to be a part of this experience, because this is informational, it's inspirational, but it's also igniting. It says to us that the anti-trafficking movement deserves to have all of us working together collectively and innovatively to solve the scourge of human trafficking. My name is James Dixon, board member of NTZ Inc., and I want to present to you this powerful panel, beginning with the founding president of NTZ, Jacqueline Alludo, because what we're talking about in this segment is a powerful bill that was just recently passed in the state of Texas, Senate Bill 1831. SB 1831 is called the No Trafficking Zone Law in Texas. You hear more about it as this panel continues. But don't forget, invite all your friends, tell them to join us, tune in, watch this important segment. And by the way, NTZ is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. You can make donations and contributions to help us with our mission, and it's tax deductible. So be sure and keep NTZ on your giving list for charitable contributions, because we need to fuel the effort as we continue to work forward against the scourge and the evil of trafficking. With no further ado now, let me present to you the founding president of NTZ Inc. And from there, we'll introduce this powerful panel that she has assembled that's going to talk to us about Senate Bill 1831 and what's going to happen around the nation as a result of the leadership of the people on this panel. Jacqueline Alludo.
Thank you so much, Bishop. I always want to bottle your energy. It is an honor to be on this panel. It's an honor to have you, Congresswoman Lee, come here out of your busy schedule. We know that SB 1831 was a couple years ago when we met at the church with Carrie Taylor, who's on the end, who's the director of Unbound Houston, and her husband, Senator Taylor, and we met and we talked about how kids were being trafficked out of schools, but also out of shelters and foster care facilities. Yeah. And so we had that conversation. We spoke for hours, and Senator Taylor said that he was gonna take this bill and do it. And I really didn't know if that was gonna happen. I should have known, because Carrie is my good friend. And before legislative session, we got together and we started talking about the language, and we said, we're gonna do this. And you worked so hard, and we all ended up at the Capitol so many times. Carrie and I prayed so many times when amendments were added, and wondering if it would get repassed. And look at all the incredible amendments that were added. So by the grace of God, that's how SB 1831 happened. Courtney, to the right of me, is an incredible survivor leader. We work with so many victims that are still in school being trafficked. And so the reason why this bill is so important is because we know that over 55% of youth in the state of Texas will get approached and groomed while they're on their school campuses. And so this was something that would actually deter predators, and not just deter them, but it enhances the penalty. And so this for us is so important. This bill is for every survivor that is still in a life, and then to prevent it from ever happening again.
Yeah. So Jacqueline, I know that people who are in this work know this like the back of your hand, right? But the audience who's listening to this, somebody's hearing this for the very first time, that SB 1831 protects children on school campuses. You mentioned 55% of survivors report that they were approached or groomed or solicited on school campuses. That's shocking news to a mom, a dad, a community leader who's listening to this and wait. they don't understand that, and I think it's important, as you mentioned Courtney, that Courtney can share a little background about her story because you're her advocate. But the fact is, this does really happen.
Oh, this happens every day, every hour. I'm sure it has to happen a lot more than even every hour in our nation. It's actually happening at an alarming rate. And so it is important to hear testimonies like Courtney's that can discuss how it happened.
Okay. So Courtney, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're such a hero, and you've got courage, charisma, and grace that God has given you. And we welcome you again. Talk to us and set the context. You were in high school and you end up being trafficked. How does that happen to someone like yourself?
Thank you, Bishop, and I'm really grateful to be joined here by some incredible leaders and people who are really championing this cause, yes, at the federal and state level, but also hands and feet on the ground, and that's what we're called to do, and I'm really thankful to serve in that capacity as well as many other capacities, but some background info to know where this began for me and where my journey began right here in Houston. I am a Houston native, and I was brought up in a suburb of Houston in Katy, Texas, and it was at my Katy, in Katy, Texas, at my Katy ISD high school where I was first initially approached by spotters and recruiters on behalf of the trafficker on whom they were working and cooperating with other peers and students, and therefore put me on the radar of my first pimp who was going to exploit me and first begin that exploitation at my high school campus while I was a minor, under the supervision, or what should have been the supervision, of many people who could have intervened. And so something to be transformed from victim to survivor leader is what the question that we should be asking, that I ask: what could have been done differently to deter my story, my path, and so many others in whom were impacted with myself and after the fact I was exploited, because nothing was done and there was no accountability, as the concern was so focused on liability, and therefore the school and the people who were a part of that time of my experience who could have stepped in and done something had the answer to that question of what could have deterred that path for me and had me experience a much different outcome is SB 1831, and so I'm so thankful to sit here to continue to champion and to implement that, because that's what we need to do, and I'm excited to discuss what that could look like, taking it all the way to the federal level.
So Courtney, one more thing before we move on. How old were you when this happened?
So I was first approached and was engaged in the grooming process at 17 years old.
Okay, 17 years old in a suburban high school.
Yes.
But that led you to a journey that took you where?
So my journey began in Katy, Texas, and that was connected to the trafficker who was approaching me on my high school campus and communicating me through social media and through other peers during school hours, was a part of organized crime networks in the Houston area. And after, in fact, being unenrolled from my school as a absolute desperate attempt that my parents were being told by my school counselors that if they did not take me out of my environment of Katy, Texas and Houston, Texas, that my life was going to be over and that I was going to, I wasn't going to make it. I was going to be killed by the people who were persistently very dedicated and committed to ensuring that the time they had invested with me, they were going to reap the profit of that. And so where my journey ended up taking me is it began here in Houston, and I came back from that program, which unfortunately did a lot more harm than good because of the lies the trafficker had put in my mind, that my parents only wanted to control me and that they did not care about my future and success. And then instead, that trafficker stepped in and said that they would be able to provide that pathway in order to for me to sustain success and independence, and that ended up taking me all across the country with multiple different networks of organized crime, where those traffickers trafficked me all the way from Houston, Texas to Dallas, Fort Worth, to Sacramento, California, to Culver City, California, and also to Nevada and Las Vegas.
Wow. All right. We'll hear more about that because thank God you did make it back here, and we're praising God for that. Carrie Taylor, you work with Unbound Houston, and you do a lot with youth on campuses and otherwise. Courtney's story is not one in a million. There's a lot of this happening, obviously, and most people still don't understand it. Why is it such a difficult thing to believe, and what is your organization doing to try to make an impact?
Well, I think students in this generation, probably starting at Courtney's generation, are the first to live online. As parents, as adults, we haven't experienced that. We don't even understand what it's like to speak to so many people every day that you don't personally know, and you interact with them. And with linear thought, I'm just going to go with development here. Like if you don't have the linear thought developed when you're in junior high or high school. We don't really have that till we're about 25. And so thinking about, oh, if I just send this picture, or if I just answer this, request, or if I engage with this person I don't know, thinking down the road about what that could lead to, it just isn't a part of their thought process. And so we used to do a lot of presentations to people intersecting with people we would consider highly vulnerable in a traditional sense, through poverty or lack of education or the foster care system, all of dysfunction in the home. And we still really need to reach those people. But we started then seeing children from what we would consider intact homes falling into this trap. And why could that be? How is that happening? And it has to be the difference in the engagement with all of those online platforms. Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, TikTok, those are the #1 places where children are now recruited, groomed, bought, and sold, not at the mall.
So Jacqueline, I know that Courtney mentioned social media. You talk a lot about that too.
I do. Obviously, social media has tremendously increased human trafficking because there's 7 billion people in the world. And so when there's 7 billion people in the world, and probably 5 billion of them can get to anybody, and one of them is your child. And let's just say that like 5 to 10% of predators, are of the society. It is so easy for them to get to children, and there is a science to it, and there is a method to it, and we all know that we're all vulnerable. The kids are especially vulnerable. They're living in a pandemic. But I think what really helped change the game with schools was not even necessarily social media, that is a different element, was the truancy factor. So what started happening is there have been kids from the beginning of time who have been sex trafficked, there have been pedophile rings, there have been teachers that have trafficked children. But what really was the issue is when we started evolving as a nation and understanding commercial sexual exploitation with our youth. Kids were being trafficked during school hours and not going to school. The ones that did have parents or did have foster parents. And then the principals and the teachers, as laws were passing in different states, if you missed school for a certain amount of time, then the parents would be held liable, or the foster parents or their guardians. So what traffickers and predators started doing is they started saying, okay, we're gonna traffic these kids during these periods. We're gonna put trap houses by the schools. We're gonna figure out where the hotels are. We're gonna move in or exploit more children to recruit and groom, and that way, guardians and parents wouldn't be held accountable. Not just held accountable, they wouldn't know what was happening to the kids at their school because they're thinking.
Wait, Jacqueline, slow down.
Yes.
Let's talk to this parent who has never been exposed to this. Explain to them what you just said in 5 seconds. Say it again in 10 seconds. That while school is going on,
Right.
What's happening?
You drop off your kid at school, the kid takes a bus at school. They will go to some classes, or maybe one or two. I mean, here's the thing. Every trafficking scenario and survivor is different. So some will miss 3 classes in a row where it's a pattern. You know, they got their homeroom, you know, and then others will miss more. But basically, the simple term is, during school hours, they're gonna miss a specific part. And they're gonna come home like nothing happened. But it's not nothing happened. Obviously, there's a critical component. Then it will start where maybe sometimes your kid doesn't come home at all. Now, when you add in technology, like what Carrie was talking about, you just change your whole game, and that's why it was easy for 55% of kids to be, because now it's like, if I know this system, and I know that maybe Courtney is, you know, struggling even though she has 2 parents, or I know maybe her grandma died, or her mom and dad just got a divorce, or she just moved here, whatever her vulnerabilities and insecurities are, because we're human, we have them. I'm a predator. My job is to prey on you. My job is to study you. And then recruiting and grooming starts happening online.
Okay.
And it could also happen with bringing another student to you. And that's why it has elevated.
So when I've said to parents, this means that you can drop your child off at school at 7:30 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Kid can go to a couple of classes, but miss 2 classes. Around the corner at the motel, they've had sex money. They're brought back to school.
They've been trafficked.
Finish today. They've been trafficked. Finish today like nothing has happened. So the parent doesn't know. And I think just saying it, just that simple.
And Rich Love has said that a lot.
Right. So as I want to move from there, but I just want to make sure that people understand that this is not the kid who's gone 2 days yet. This is the kid who's going to school. Traffickers, predators have learned the system and how to manipulate it. And so that's why the no trafficking zone law is so powerful, because it does create this no trafficking zone barrier around every school in the state of Texas. Whereas there's a 1,000 feet barrier. So if they get a text message, any groomed in any way, any contact,
Solicitation.
while they're on a school campus or at a school event, the crime is escalated to a felony, and the penalties are harsher and stiffer as a deterrent.
Yes, because in recent history in Texas, it was just like deferred. It wasn't even probation that traffickers were getting. So this is an incredible law.
Yeah, imagine a trafficker getting deferred adjudication for selling your child during the school day. So the teeth, one of the major elements of this bill that we want to understand, we want every prosecutor to understand, is that all you need is evidence that they sent a text about an appointment. All you need is evidence that they solicited this child while they were in school or at a UIL event. You have what you need to prosecute it. It's a great tool for any prosecutor.
Yes.
It makes it easier to prosecute traffickers. And I think that's the main jewel in the crown for this one. I would say, I'd love to hear what the Congresswoman has to say, and Larissa, what Congressman McCall has to say about taking this federally, because let's say you have a prosecutor in a given county that is either unaware of the teeth here or just doesn't think this is something they're going to use. You would still have this federal fallback if we make it federal law. So I'd love to hear what they say about that.
Larissa, Congressman McCall this is one of the passionate issues for him, trafficking, period. And tell us the Congressman's mind and thought about SB 1831 and why it's important, not just in Texas, but any place else.
Thank you, Bishop. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to represent my boss. I know I'm a mediocre substitute, but
we won't tell her. We won't tell her that you're an upgrade. We won't tell the Congressman that you're the upgrade.
Thank you. You know, I think this is such a huge issue. that just has not come to the forefront of parents' minds, right? Like the fact that we are sending our kids to school, thinking they're being educated and doing their hobbies and activities, and we don't understand the vulnerabilities across the board. We are so proud. Congressman McCall is just a huge, passionate advocate to fight human trafficking. And I think in the caustic environment that we find ourselves in politics, every day there are few issues that we can come together and work together in a bipartisan manner. And I feel that he really has that heart for it. And we're so excited to see the NTZ bill, getting into sports facilities, getting into massage parlors, getting into schools, and something that we're excited about, we kind of brought to the attention of State Rep Tam Parker, the issue to highlight that tattoo parlors are a huge intersection that these victims are coming through. Through various conversations that we had with law enforcement and our survivors, hearing their stories, these traffickers, they brand their victims with their name, and that carries with a boy or a girl for ages. And we thought, well, if they're coming through that intersection, what if we educate? What if we have signage? And so we were so proud that he worked to kind of move this with his colleagues into this. And I'll just touch on this. Schools are the battleground in this issue. We can talk about prevention and awareness and all of these things that are so important, but the fact that our children have this at their fingertips every day, access. We talk about access to our children, and I have a 10 and a 13-year-old, and I've been dubbed by my 13-year-old as the meanest mom in the world because I have yet to let her have a cell phone. And the thing is, these kids are being preyed upon because of access. I mean, when we were growing up, you might have interaction with someone outside your city, at a football game or something. You kind of knew who your kids were going around. And today, because of technology and the access that our children have, and the traffickers know, that is, I'm going to groom this child, I'm going to prey on their vulnerabilities. So our kids need to be educated on what is going on. And our teachers and our counselors in the education system have got to know what's going on right under our noses, because like Carrie said, these kids don't know how to process, the cause and effect of what they're doing. I mean, they're trying to get friends and likes and someone that's saying, you're beautiful, and that's how they go at it. And we would love to see this awareness elevated, and we'd be particularly interested to see the bill text on this. But we look forward to moving what we can on a federal level to bring awareness to this issue.
Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has been a real warrior against trafficking in the Congress. And of course, she has boots on the ground here in Houston. We often say that she seems to be omnipresent because she's everywhere where a fight needs to be, standing up for people and for making sure people are safe. Congresswoman, as you think about this, of course, SB 1831, the No Trafficking Zone law, and of course that protects schools in Texas. What can be done, and what are you thinking? Talk to us about that regards to a federal law, but give a little bit of background about some things you've done in Congress in addition to that as it relates to sex trafficking and human trafficking.
Well, Bishop, thank you so very much. And
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for being here. I'm empowered when I'm in an NTZ zone. And I think it is important to announce and pronounce we are in an NTZ zone right here in NRG.
Right.
And that is going to be a national phenomenon across the country. And so I want to make sure that I emphasize that. And I'm going to be passing through a number of papers because I want to be able to bring to forefront some of the thoughts that I have. First of all, it's a delight to be with Jackie and Courtney, with the better person of Congressman McCall's team, and of course, if I might, Mrs. Taylor, and I told her how lucky he is to have his own legislative guru to be able to help him. But allow me for a moment to elevate Courtney's trial and tribulation to a level of which I said to her when I apologized yesterday, that the nation owes you the protection of this little book called the Constitution, and that's what we are doing. When we look and see that there have been about 2.8 million children living on the streets of the nation at risk for trafficking in the sex industry, we don't count the Courtneys of the world that are in the high schools or middle schools that previously from NTZ, for not having NTZ, these individuals were praying. So we got 2.8 vulnerable children or foster children that age out. But that number may be, I would say, I could stretch it to 5 million children. And several things that would draw the attention of the nation because of this Constitution, where you could extrapolate or you could imagine that your protections are even higher. The 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude is allowed, except as a punishment for crime, where if the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist in the United States. Human trafficking, sex trafficking, is a form of involuntary servitude. It's unconstitutional. She was violated by the very laws that are supposed to protect her. And then, in addition to that, by the, we say these very quickly, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, but the 14th Amendment indicates that her due process, her right to life and liberty, has been violated. So my point is that this is by nature federal. We take pride in the fact, or I do, that I've come from a state where the people to be listened to are you all. That we get what we need to do as it's percolated up, percolated up, Violence Against Women Act, from women in organizations finally saying they've had enough. And what are you going to do, federal government? And so I'd like to equate Homeland Security, of which I'm a member of that committee, with the ending of human trafficking.
Yes.
Because you violate the security of the nation by letting, and I want to defend the place that I represent, the nation. I know it has a good heart. That by not paying attention to the national scourge, the national plague, the pandemic or the epidemic of human trafficking, we fail in our duties of securing the nation. So let me just say, as the founder of the Congressional Children's Caucus, this has been something that I have had a passion for. And when Congressman McCall and myself came to Houston some years ago as the very first federal congressional hearing outside of Washington on Homeland Security or human trafficking, it was because Houston had been labeled in El Paso as a center point for human trafficking. Now, some people want to put a paper bag on their head. I believe what you all have done, and Jacqueline coming to Houston sort of in the overlapping time frame, was to say that we're not going to take it anymore. And the hearing was enlightening. People came forward to really tell the stories about the scourge of human trafficking. I chaired the ranking member of the Border Security Committee, and we've got this huge border with Mexico, almost 1,300 miles. Mexico has a good intention, but their laws do not help them complement what we're trying to do. So basically, America is it. Houston is it. El Paso is it. And Jacqueline, you couldn't be at a better place. I guess you saw it, and our eyes had to be open. So we continued this work, analyzing. I wanted to emphasize the point that if Courtney had not been recaptured, her own strength, the own pulling back, she would have been part of, I think this number is old, I said $32 billion. The number is much larger in human trafficking because the idea of it is, and I mentioned this, is that you don't consume it.
Yeah.
Drugs brought in, kilos, stacks of drugs, horrible drugs, fentanyl and all. But it's gone and you gotta go get it again.
Yeah.
In human trafficking, if she was to be captured at 14, she could be held and not seen by anyone into her 20s, and not seen anywhere, not seen by family, not looked for. And that's what happens with those who are abused and vulnerable and aged out, are homeless.
Yes.
They become the kind of fodder for it. So if you say 2.8, why don't I say 5 million children? And 32 billion, why don't I say a much larger amount than that? And so what we have done in the federal area is, for example, in the VAWA bill, the Violence Against Women, we specifically, with the fight of Jackie at that time and Wagner and others, we made the CHOOSE funding be targeted toward sex trafficking, human trafficking, $10 million a year, which you all have access to, and after 2024, $25 million a year, to be able to move forward on this national effort to knock out the scourge of that. In addition, we just worked recently on the question of taking care of victims, and so we made sure that the restorative, the idea to help, I should say, victims and those who are the perpetrators will not interfere with the enforcement of criminal laws. And the DAs of the world were very happy. We believe that we should try to restore people, make them better, but in order to protect those who have been trafficked and those who are the perpetrators, we want to make sure that they're brought to justice and we don't let them get away with that. So that's some of the things that was done federally. At the same time, we have also put sex trafficking, human trafficking in the Violence Against Women Act, which it was not before. We hope that we will get this bill signed by the president. It's gone through the House. It's now a possibility. We've had ups and downs, that the Senate will move quickly on it. But in it, we reform how you train medical professionals, law enforcement, schools, that they're more tuned in to the tools that they need to spot human trafficking, to spot sex trafficking, because it sort of interrelates. She was obviously not used to, how should I say, be a friendly person and say, good morning. She was used, she was a victim. And her fellow victims were used. And they're recycled over and over again. So we want to get our law enforcement, and we've done well in Houston, but to get the federal law enforcement, to be trained, to get the best practice tools and train materials for behavioral health professionals to identify and respond to the VAWA crimes, which include sex trafficking. And in addition, we tried to help the tribal nations, which were a literal, how should I say it? They were a little welcome sign for people who would run on, they would human traffic the young indigenous women and men, and then they'd run off. And we couldn't determine it because by the time they ran off the jurisdiction, the Pedlo or the reservation, the evidence had dissipated and there was no way to do it. So we've given that jurisdiction to tribal jurisdictions to try and stop the scourge of that. But as I have labeled, Homeland Security is the ending of human trafficking, and to recognize the constitutional presence that is here, and to know that we're in the center point. You couldn't have been a more perfect place. We got motivated to begin to write a federal NTZ law.
Yes.
I'm excited to tell you that as we sit here today, what we call the Legislative Council that Congressman McCall is used to, is huddling around, writing the bill that we will be introducing in the very near future, and working, I hope, with my colleague, because they are working on the language to make sure that it tracks and fits the authority of the federal government. But with the advocacy of Congressman McCall, we're certainly hoping that his level of appreciation, that because in the federal government we give incentives, or we take privileges away. So we encourage people to do NTZ zones, and we incentivize it. And in the alternative, which is what they're now trying to think about, what the penalties would be. And certainly that has to be embracing, so we get more members to be able to join the bill. I have the comfort level, I just feel the spirit that this is a bill that may surprise us and move quickly. Because people are just not, they're just stunned by what is happening to Courtney. They're just literally stunned because it just doesn't match the image. Because what you're saying is Courtney leaves and goes to lunch because the predators don't have to be out of the zone in the previous years. They could be on right outside the door. So as she walks out, they've got her, they've got a car, they've got lunch, and I'm just trying to see what happens, and she's there. And so most people don't know, and then she can come back. And who knows? And her intimidation and her depreciation and hatefulness, hatred because of what's being done to her, silence her words. Or there's somebody not trained who says, oh, they don't even understand what is going on. So I think what I'd like to say is that this has been an enormous experience as it relates to Human Trafficking Month. And it's been a vital experience to those viewing us to open our eyes, to let us be the protectors of our neighbors. That if they were doing this unjustly to Courtney's parents and not getting information, then our professionals in schools and on buses and law enforcement and nonprofits should be so tuned in that they would have seen this devastating and vile behavior. But let me also mention that this is a city that has the highest number of brothels, of which one would not think. Brothels and various other kinds of houses. Strip clubs.
And cantinas.
And that makes it very easy, Bishop, for these traffickers to move in and out, and as Courtney is probably saying to me, for this product to run into a strip club, entertain someone, and get back to where they're supposed to be. And I just want to finish on this because we took time to focus, without any offense, see if I can find it, on men. And the role of men in ending human trafficking. And what we said is that we welcome fathers, grandfathers, brothers, uncles, male cousins, friends, boyfriends, and all men to be present and accounted for in the fight against human trafficking.
Absolutely.
And it is simple how men can help. And I know that my Twitter account or whatever is available, social media, is going to be popping. But one man can do a lot to stop human trafficking by being the voice in the room that will speak up should a conversation turn to the topic of purchasing sex. And I know where I'm going with this, but I'm going to finish it. Men can say that buying sex contributes to the crime of human trafficking and that children are being sex trafficked. Now that person may be isolated in the room, but somebody's going to hear them. A man can be the one who turns down the offer of a stripper for his bachelor party because he knows that the woman who performs may be a victim of human trafficking, and he understands that her bondage could have begun when she was a little girl. And she's still doing this. He may also think about what he might say to his own daughter, if he has one, or to be, who may ask him what he did to stop human trafficking that targets girls, women and girls as sex workers. A man can promote healthy and safe relationships to his son or those males he may be mentoring so that they can live full lives without contributing to the enslavement of women or girls by purchasing sex.
Yes.
Men care what other men think about them, so men must be the ones who carry this message. Let me also take the wool away and know that young boys
Oh, yeah.
are trafficked as well.
Sure.
And this is embracing of whatever entity, human being, is using or being used as a sex item. And so my remarks are that what we're doing here today is the federal government's business. It is a constitutional question of are we allowing today, in a different form, these young bright minds and lives and bodies to be enslaved.
Yes.
When we have said that it does not exist and should not exist, and there is slavery around the world, that people like Chairman McCall, Ranking Member McCall on Foreign Affairs is an adamant fighter against slavery around the world that still exists because of his championing human rights. And we work alongside of each other. But in this very book, it says that these little children, that Courtney and others should be protected under this book, which is a little book. And that those of you who may be listening and may want comfort or may want to know, do you have any merit? You do. Because you should not be denied your liberty, your due process, your posterity, yourself.
Yes.
Because the 14th Amendment says you are owed due process.
Due process.
And we must be re-empowered to use that against knuckleheads that want to do something to our children and our young people. So thank you very much. I am feeling uplifted that our federal legislation is going to have wings and wind behind its back.
Absolutely. Thank you, Congresswoman, for such a thorough and in-depth, substantive perspective on this from federal level. And I know Jacqueline was mentioned about the foster sister bill. And I want to close on that before we leave today, because that's very, very important. And Carrie, before I forget, because I've been working on this stuff a lot, so my mind is a little bit frenzied. But I think one of the things that we can do too, if we can itemize what makes this SB 1831 in practical language, here are 10 ways, 20 ways this bill protects children in schools. Yeah. That we can really share that as an education piece in practical language, so parents will understand it and others will get it. Because some people still think, Jacqueline, that the bill doesn't have weight. I mean, I think that's asinine, but I think that making sure people will really understand it clearly. Jacqueline.
Well, I want to thank Congresswoman for not only being so thorough, but she is a powerhouse. Foster Sesta, if you don't know what it is, it was the Backpage bill where on 3 different continents, millions of people were being bought and sold. And let me just tell you how many people were being bought and sold. It used to be, it was Craigslist, and then Craigslist decided there was too much liability because they were actually finally getting held accountable. So this group of men, Backpage, decided to distribute that they were going to buy and sell people or allow predators to come on their website. They literally went from, in a matter of a few years, $25 million to Backpage being worth almost $500 million. And so the number for human trafficking, when we're talking about people, which traffickers consider products. So when you're talking about sex, organs, drugs, and arms, it's a $150 billion industry. So when traffickers look at a person, if they're gonna harvest your organs and traffic you, that will be a person that's worth $100,000. And this was actually broken down to me by traffickers. So their logic was if they could take 5 people, that would be $500,000 a day. And I say this all to say this is a horrific crime with evil behind it. And with Backpage, people really tried to stop that bill. Like high-tech people, I'm talking about Google, Yahoo, and I went to Bishop Dixon and he said, you gotta meet Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And that day changed my life, and I'm not kidding you. I mean, I don't say things that I do not mean. That day changed my life. And it was at the Samaritan's Feet, where you pulled me aside, and I talked to the Congresswoman quickly, and I said, this is what happened, people getting, you know, because we had like 10 minutes, I was trying to get it all in. And she said, I'm gonna help you. And I was hoping she would, but I didn't know. You met with about 25 advocates and agencies that you did not know. And you took 3 hours out of your time. I just want to say that because people in Congress don't do that. And you had all of us come up and state why this was important and what we needed. And I knew right then and there, this woman is amazing. And she actually cares about people. And she's gonna keep her word and fight. And so she met with all of us. And then a couple of days later, I think my phone rang at like midnight. And she said, Jackie, this is Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Do you still want to fight for this bill? And I said, yes. And I was thinking, I don't know if we're gonna win, because we're going up against everyone, Google, you know, all these billionaires. And this is what I will tell you. She fought for 3 amendments to add in because no one wanted anything added into this FOSTA-SESTA bill. She got restitution for victims. Probably the most important part of FOSTA-SESTA, because victims should have restitution. Victims need help. They need help to go to the hospital, to have medical bills, to see a therapist. They can't work because they are traumatized. And I watched her on C-SPAN, and I said, oh my God, this woman is probably the strongest woman I've ever met in my whole life. She carried that bill on the House floor, and I kind of realized at that point that if you go to Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and you ask her to get something done, and she says she's gonna do it, she is gonna try everything in her to get it done, when everybody else at that time did not welcome that bill. People were trying to actually fold on that bill. And so I will never forget that day. I have the utmost respect for you. I know how hard you fought for that. You have gone above and beyond. Even the Violence Against Women's Act, again, setting a meeting after you got out of the House floor at 10:30 at night. You know, I said, oh my gosh, she's gonna kill me. But you did it with such grace. And you listened to all of these advocates and victims and indigenous victims across the nation. And so you don't find elected officials like this. And so I just want to say, if anyone can get this bill passed and can fight for it and get it done, it would be Congresswoman Lee, and then hopefully the partnership with Congressman McCall. I mean, that would be beautiful because we love what they're both doing. And so I want to also just bring this up about schools for people. Why it is so easy to traffic. First of all, schools should never put the bus routes on websites. I mean, you gotta realize how traffickers think. I don't understand, like, traffickers are predators. So anything with a schedule, a school has a schedule. So I'm gonna know the schedule of that school. I'm gonna know the schedule of the buses that are running.
Truancy laws.
Yes, if I'm putting up, like, these laws on the school schedules and everything, we have a girl that went missing here in Houston. She literally got off of her school bus 9 years ago, Allie.
Yes.
Her mom, Joanne, had created National Missing Day. 9 years this woman has fought, walking home from her bus. So I just wanted to say, I don't want to veer off, but telling people, when there is a schedule to anything, especially children, traffickers are going to study that because they're predators.
Yes, they're
So
predators.
we have to figure out how to not let them know those schedules. And
Jacqueline, can I just say something else just really quick? I know we're cutting close on time, but just something we haven't kind of highlighted here today on this panel is the familial trafficking that is going on. And that these children are being trafficked by family members, and then they're going into the school system, So if that is the intersection, the one intersection for these children, someone needs to pick up on something's not right here, or the behavioral issues. So you have to have that training and awareness. I mean, kids are being dropped off at the local truck stop to be trafficked and pimped out and then taken to school and dropped off at school.
By a family member.
Yes, by family members.
Yeah.
And so we have got to protect these kids who have no one else to reach out to. So I just wanted to highlight the familial trafficking aspect that's going on with these kids.
Let me say this too, as we wrap up, because this is such a powerful panel. Congresswoman, you mentioned that the federal government incentivizes the right behavior, right? And for example, for schools. One of the challenges Kerry Taylor has and Javelin has is trying to get all school personnel educated. And often schools are trying to act like they don't have a problem, for one thing. And then there are certain challenges. I think offline, we can talk about that at another time, but perhaps they could be incentivized for schools to get trained, for schools to give access to students so that students can be trained and equipped, because the traffickers have access to the kids, but the advocates and the experts don't. So if the groomers and the traffickers and all of them have access to the kids at will, at infinitum, we've got to figure out a way to get the education that these people have in their minds and their heads to young people and to the people who are handling them. Perhaps in a court situation, if the teachers have been trained to know what to look for, what to spot, and what to do about it. Because often, I'll be honest with you, when adults see something, they don't do anything because they don't know what to do. And so I just food for thought as relates to as you begin to structure and think about the federal legislation.
I will accept that, and I will also lend my staff to give a greater understanding of the utilization of the CHOOSE Act. That's where those dollars are at this point from 2020 to 2024, 10 million a year grants, and starting in 2024, 25 million a year. But let's see how an organization, foundation, can then put a prototype on how you train these teachers and professionals, which is what the point I was saying, that we want to give access to these professionals to learn. And who better to learn from than those who are immersed in this issue.
And then coordinates on the White House Council, and so I'm thinking beyond this 10 and 25 billion,
Right.
we could probably leverage the strength of advocates like yourselves and maybe ask corporations to match, to help them to use their largesse in a way that says we are for children and make it popular for those who do and make it unpopular for those who don't. That was cold language. All right, I don't know if they called it or not.
You're closing, so are you closing?
Yes, I'm about to give final comments.
I just want to say that this has been so powerful that my commitment for my committee is to hold, we're missing the Human Trafficking Month, which is now. It's my commitment for my federal committee to hold a human trafficking hearing that can highlight the great work that's been done by all of you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Gentlemen?
Before we close, I want to also honor Bea and Teresa, who have survived trafficking and from the school also. A little older, but again, where 18-year-olds go, and so I just want to say thank you all too. And I want to hear your thoughts about all of this, since this bill really was created for survivors and people still caught in the life.
Thank you. I want to bring this home to how surreal this is for me, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, and everybody here. Something I'd like to share that was a part of my experience when I was indeed a minor, and I was initially lured into the life as a child and a minor and trafficked throughout my later adult years. But where that began is I was solicited for the first time for illicit sex on Backpage as a junior in high school. as a 17-year-old. And to now be an honorable member on the U.S. Advisory Council to combat human trafficking in this country that I so dearly love and believe in, but we have a far way to go. It's so surreal to see people who were a part of those monumental things that when I was still in the life being exploited, I felt the repercussion of that. And even at the time, not being able to understand or see and know the plans that God had for me, Jeremiah 29:11, to purpose that I know He's orchestrated this group of experts, but passionate leaders, mothers, grandmothers, fathers, people who have children themselves, to know the urgency to this and to say, I was that child, and I saw the work being done, but so many others around us, that's felt like something so far off where we couldn't feel that justice because we had been robbed of justice and treated and absolutely exploited in every single way that a child or no human being ever should, because we have unalienable rights in this country that so many other people do not. And it's not just about our unalienable rights in this incredible Constitution that we have, but it's about our basic human rights to have safety and security, life and liberty in this country, each individual, not one above the other. And so I want you to know from my lived experience that I felt, I saw, and now it is an honor to be a part of the monumental things where we are making history to let perpetrators know that we are coming for them. And as I want to echo earlier in our press conference, we're your worst nightmare. These people sitting beside me, we are unified together and we're coming for you. And I want you to also know that this is an army of people who now I know have not only my back, but they have each and every one of each victim's and survivor's backs.
Wow. Let me thank each one of you for your contribution to this panel and this conversation today. Thank you, Carrie Taylor, for your amazing work.
Yes.
And we appreciate you. Thank you, Larissa, for your awesome work as well. You're not just talking as a staff member, but Councilman McCall, you're talking from your own heart.
Yes.
And consciousness and convictions. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, for your stellar leadership as well. And your other colleague, Congressman Green, was here earlier, and he's already pledged to support whatever legislation you bring forth, along with Congressman McCall. And thank you so much, Courtney, for what you shared, so much of yourself on behalf of all of those survivors who are championing the cause now to end discouraging trafficking. And Jackie, we appreciate your leadership so much, and all of you for tuning in. We're going to take a quick break and come back to close this day out. It's going to be powerful.
Can we take a pause?
Yes, but before we go, we're going to pause because today is a day that we should remember fallen heroes. Courtney, give us that moment.
Thank you, Bishop. Today in history marks a very significant and devastating tragedy that took place in our country, now today marking the 36th anniversary of a disaster that was felt throughout the nation. I myself, I was not born yet as this took place in January 28, 1986, but my loved ones who were a part of this and impacted greatly as the other families were of the fallen astronauts of the Challenger disaster. Today marks the 36th anniversary, and I want to just shout out and honor the fallen astronauts, one specifically so close to my family and my heart, Judith Resnick. She was the first American Jewish woman in space, the second woman in space, and I'm absolutely honored to call her a family member, and I want to honor my grandma Tepelu and all of the other families who lost with the 6 other lives with Judy their life that day and gave the ultimate sacrifice. And so I ask for you to join me in a moment of silence to honor them and their sacrifice that they gave for this country.
Amen. Amen. We're thankful to God. There's so many sheroes in this room, and there's some heroes in this room as well. We appreciate each one of you. Don't you touch that dial. We'll be right back to open the very next panel. We're only going to take an 8-minute break rather than 15. And so we'll transition quickly and come back with something very special and powerful. So don't you go anywhere. We'll be right back with more NTZ Impact Week. By the way, our chairman was here, Edgar Galone. I don't think he's still here. The chairman of the Harris County Sports and Convention Corporation Board. We appreciate all of our board members and all of our team. All right, we'll be right back in 8 minutes. Thank you very much. Give this panel a hand.